Hello, and welcome to the small group edition of my book, What's So Amazing About Grace. One of the side benefits of being an author is hearing from people about the effect that my writing has had on their lives. With this particular book, I've heard from thousands of readers who have responded with their own stories of grace, true life stories of reconciliation and forgiveness. I'm convinced that grace is the most beautiful word and concept in the English language. And I'm also convinced that the future of the church depends on how well we master this notion of grace. I'm especially pleased that you are studying grace in a small group setting. A hermit on a desert island wouldn't have much opportunity to practice grace. It applies to relationships, a brother or a sister, a broken family, a feud between neighbors, a prodigal son or daughter. For that reason, a small group setting is the very best place to study grace. I hope you feel free over the next few weeks to express yourself openly and honestly, to raise some of the questions you might have, to discuss what puzzles you and maybe even what angers you. Think of this group you are with right now as a training ground for grace. You could learn some principles in this group that could well transform your life. I'll be hosting the video sessions that you watch throughout your study. Each session will have a brief intro video to help set up the theme of the session and lead to some initial discussion in your small group. You will then view a longer video session, usually lasting about 10 minutes, which will go deeper into that week's topic, using interviews, opinions, and provocative stories. Following this, you'll be directed back into your participants' guides for further group discussion. To close our time together, I'll offer a final thought to end the session. I trust that this study will be a blessing to your small group as we seek to answer the question, what's so amazing about grace?
Grace. Something you say before you eat, sometimes?
If someone's coordinated, smooth, they're graceful, I guess.
How about a disgrace? Does that count?
I don't know. Well, Amazing Grace, maybe? The hymn.
You forgive somebody when you do blame him.
I've found this remarkable thing called grace is often revealed better in stories than through definition and lectures. Real examples from real people.
My faith is much stronger.
In the next 10 weeks, you're going to meet some remarkable storytellers of grace. They'll bring their own insights, experiences, and revelations to our discussion sessions. As we begin our study together, I'd like briefly to introduce you to 6 of them. You'll hear a mother's story of a modern prodigal, a wayward daughter who tests a family's ability to give their compassion, understanding, and grace.
It's been a learned experience, and the tough love, I don't think that that's a good example of a Christian parent to be showing their children, is that, you know, you're unworthy of my time or my love, or, you know, unless you're perfect, I don't want you in my life. You know, no one's perfect.
We'll visit with Dr. Lewis Smedes, a distinguished theologian who's literally written the book, in fact, several books, on the subject of forgiveness.
There are 2 ways of dealing with being a victim. One is revenge, and the other is forgiveness. Revenge doesn't work. It's the sorriest loser's game in town. It doesn't work because you never get even.
But what about forgiving the seemingly unforgivable? You'll hear the remarkable story of Debbie Morris, author of Forgiving the Dead Man Walking.
When God looks at me, he doesn't see some beaten down teenage girl who's been repeatedly raped and abused for 2 days, who's weak and unsure and full of shame and self-doubt. God doesn't see that person.
For Dr. Patricia Raybon, overcoming hate and injustice was complicated. She realized that despite her own strong Christian faith, she had become part of the problem.
It's hard for people to hear it, but it's the truth. I hated white people, and hated white people for 40 long years.
Mel White and I have been friends for over 20 years, despite our agreeing to disagree over some of our most basic beliefs. And that tests our own sense of grace.
I love the church. The church is at a process right now of rejecting God's gay and lesbian children. And I think it's because they don't understand grace themselves. That once you really appropriate grace, you see, I'm loved. God loves me as I am. Then you can do a whole lot of loving to other people who don't feel loved as they are.
And who better to talk about the conflict between legalism and grace than one of America's great preachers and teachers, Dr. Tony Campolo.
I think that most religions of the world have a kind of bookkeeping mentality, that God keeps books, and somehow on Judgment Day, if the good outweighs the bad, you get in. In one way or another, most religions do promote that. And I think that Christianity is unique in talking about the grace of God as a gift.
Grace is different from most theological words. It still has a kind of glow about it. When I wrote my book, I began noticing uses of the word grace, and hardly a day passes when I don't see or hear that word. We talk about graceful athletes, or the United States may catch a spy and deport him, and when they do that, they declare him persona non grata, which literally means a person without grace. I'll let you in on a secret. The original title of my book was What's So Amazing About Grace, and Why Don't Christians Show More of It? The publisher finally talked me out of that title for two reasons. First, they said all of those words wouldn't fit on the book jacket. And then second, they said it wasn't very gracious. It was too in your face. To tell you the truth, though, I wrote this book because grace is not the first word that comes to mind when people think about Christians. That bothers me. Here we've got the most wonderful gift in the world. We're commissioned by God to spread the good news about it. But instead, the world sees us as the opposite, as ungracious. My book tells about a very unscientific survey that I conducted. While flying on airplanes, I would strike up a conversation with my seatmate. I'm a journalist, I'd say. I'm writing a book about evangelical Christians. Could you tell me the first words that came to your mind when I said evangelical Christians? Now, I don't recommend doing this survey. Many people would respond with an anti-pornography, anti-abortion, anti-homosexuality. Or they might mention a prominent spokesman for the religious right. Not once did anyone mention anything remotely resembling grace. Somehow, we are not communicating this grand message that God has entrusted to us. Gordon MacDonald once said that grace is the one thing the church has that you can't get anywhere else. The church can feed the hungry, so can the United Way. We can heal the sick, but so can hospitals and HMOs. We can build houses for the homeless, so can the U.S. government. There's only one thing that you can get only at church, and that's grace. For whatever reason, God has chosen the church to dispense this amazing message that God loves sinners. The rest of the world may view grace as one of those schmaltzy sentiments that you learn in church. It's not schmaltzy at all. As we go on this journey together, you will see that grace is tough, it's hard as nails, and it's powerful. Every so often we see grace break out on a global scale, and when we do, the world falls silent. Just in recent times, we've seen some remarkable demonstrations of grace. We live in a world of power, of threats and violence and war. Pick any era of history and you can read about war and conflicts of power. Yet in 1 year alone, 1989, 1/3 of the world was set free with barely a shot being fired.
We saw grace lived out in Eastern Europe when communism toppled and the Berlin Wall came tumbling down, brought down in large part because of Christians who marched through the streets holding candles, not guns, and singing hymns. We've seen all these things on the global scale and also on the personal scale. As I said, after writing this book on grace, I heard from thousands of readers. I've got a file drawer at home full of those letters. They tell of parents who had drummed a child out of their family because of something she did 20 years ago, and they're now reaching out to her in love. They tell of gay neighbors whom everyone on the block has shunned and gossiped about, and now Christians on that block believe that they should show grace even to people they disagree with. They tell me of growing up in a racist environment like the one I grew up in the Deep South, and then feeling God's Spirit at work inside them, breaking down those walls, melting feelings of prejudice. I even heard from President Bill Clinton. He read my book after a White House staff member, a young Chinese-American Christian, gave it to him. I've had to learn a lot about grace, Mr. Clinton wrote, and we all know why. Never, ever underestimate the power of grace. It's a gift from God, and it holds within it a supernatural power. I've seen its power again and again, and I've felt it in my own life. I hope and pray that you will experience the power of grace in our next few weeks together. Grace is a gift. It's free of charge. It's on the house. You only have to do one thing to receive a gift. Open your hands. I pray that you will have open hands to receive this wonderful, amazing thing called grace.